Welcome again to the Rundown. This week we're speaking with Jon Mann, who is based in Haarlem, just outside Amsterdam. You will know Jon as a Codefoils team rider. He also is a team rider for Apple Tree boards. And this year you're going to catch him at a bunch of places in France. He's doing the Hawaii races. And if you can nab one of those spots, you could join the moon tours with Casey and John in the Maldives. And what month's that, John?
That's the first 10 days of June. Yeah.
Okay, well, welcome. Great to catch up with you.
Yeah, good to finally chat to you, Mr. Hand Paddle Co.
Yeah. So I want to really nail down on your local run. So the idea here is to just, it's a bit of a user guide really. People that are going to come to your town, how they're going to come at your run, what are the distance, how do they get in and out of it, who do they connect with. So what runs, can you give us a bit of an overview of downwind runs in your area?
Yeah, so the Netherlands, we're kind of similar to you guys. I listened to Josh's one before. The wind changes all the time here. We don't have trade winds, and we're lucky that countrywide, we've got options for every direction of wind. So we've got the lakes. They cover everything. They're good for beginners. And then we've got the North Sea, which I guess that's like my local. That's pretty much 130 kilometers of open beach. And most of the time we pick runs based on logistics or proximity to us or convenience. The coast curves a bit, so there are certain parts of the coast that are better for certain wind angles. Yeah, we're pretty lucky that we don't have like headlands, cliffs and whatever. And we have a couple piers that stick out, so on the really big days, if you want to avoid a shorey, you will go in downwind of those. Okay. So that's kind of a zoomed out view of what downwinding's like in Holland. So a lot of wind directions covered. And the North Sea is just a bit deeper and a bit more fun than the lakes generally for me. We don't get any ground swells really. The UK blocks everything, so we don't get real swells. Sometimes we'll get a north swell from up far north, but a swell here, if you're lucky, will be 8 to 10 seconds at best. So it's perfect for downwinding. Like whenever you look at the buoys, there's always swells between 4 to 6, 7 seconds, like your perfect downwinding swells. And we have some really good buoys, so you can see everything, like all the frequencies, all the directions. So yeah, it's really good to, even when the wind isn't great, you can still see how it's how the bumps are going to be, because the buoys are out at deeper water, so you just know I'll just cut out a bit offshore and then you're good.
Yeah, great. And in the bay, do you typically, like with our Botany Bay, do you typically need higher wind strengths for the bay to be good?
Yeah, so for the lakes, so for the lakes are like probably, they're not very deep. They're between 4 and 6 meters. So typically for beginners, I tend to say you want about 18 knots or more on average to have decent runs. But then you have really clean bumps, and there's like a pretty good crew of folk that want to go on the lake, so you can always find a buddy pretty much. So that's really good. And then for the North Sea, you're probably good from about 14, 15 knots. You're good. The North Sea's not that deep either. It's anywhere between 10 and 16 meters roughly where we're downwinding. I think you have to go very, very far offshore to get deeper water than that. So yeah, predominantly between 10 and 16 meters. So you can do 10 to 12 knots if the current's right, but you can also have 10 to 12 knots if the current's going the wrong way, where it's nothing. So I tend to say to people 15 knots and you're good.
Okay, and so you say you've got a good crew that are always keen for the lakes. What about out on the sea? How's
we've got a slightly smaller crew. Yeah, so we've got like a group of guys that we've been doing it a little bit longer. Maybe like 10, 12 of us. So normally we can always find a buddy. And then we've got a bigger WhatsApp community, like it's just a Dutch downwind WhatsApp community. I think there's about 80 odd people in there. Yeah, that's a mix of people who are interested in the sport but haven't stepped into it yet, through to those that have been doing it for the last 3-4 years. There's like a Stoke chat, and then there's different region or area chats, so that everyone can do their logistics. And it's great because you can just be like, okay, I'm here, the wind's on, who's keen to do a run? And there's like a 75% success rate on finding buddies. And it's good having like the whole community in one big chat. So in terms of finding buddies, like, yeah, And if you come to the Netherlands and you want to do a downwind run, just ping myself on Instagram, and I can either put you in the chat or I can hook you up with other people. Yeah.
Great. What would you say is your most typical run, or if we were going to hone in on one specific section, what would that be?
So where I live, I'm 15 to 20 minutes to the beach. Yep. So pretty much just base my most commonly done run on that. So and me and my buddy, we live near each other. So Sebrin, who I do most of my runs with, and that's a run between. It's a beach called Langeveldeslag and Parnassia. That's a stretch of 14 kilometers, or sometimes we'll take it slightly further either end depending on the wind. But normally for a post work quick run, that's our go-to, and that works both ways. You know, the coast isn't too angled, so you can pretty much go with anywhere between like southwest to southwest. Depends on how onshore it is, depends on how hard you've got to keep cutting out, and then 180 degrees. So last night after work, we actually did with a northerly, we did the other way, so Parnassia down south to Langeveldeslag. It's quite a cool run because it goes past Zandvoort, which is where the Formula 1 track is. Yeah, and interestingly, Zandvoort has this weird thing that it's shallower for longer there, so it's a pain when you start at the north side because then you've got like less good bumps to work your way out. But when you're coming the other way from the south, especially when it's big, for some reason you'll be downwinding, and then all of a sudden you'll get to the shallower bit and then the bumps like groom themselves. So you end up having like a 5 kilometer stretch where you've just got like stacked up lines. You know, when you say, it's a big coast, it's all open beach, you think it's all going to be all the same. But actually you do get quite good variation on how the bumps are on a run. And you also get these hectic rips that come out. So you have like messy bits as well. Yeah, so that's our most commonly done run.
Say on a great day through to a very mediocre day, what kinds of kilometre per hour splits are you typically doing? So from, what's the fastest to slowest?
On a good day, if it's New King, like 25, 30 knots, and you get your current going with you, you'll go probably anywhere between, you'll be sitting under 210, between 2 and 210. Yeah, you can go quite fast. And then the opposite, light wind, current against you. I've done 4-minute split, 4-minute Ks with the 1250. Yeah, you can do anything from 30 odd minutes to when I did the 4-minute Ks with the 1250, it took me an hour and 10 minutes.
Because it's such a range too, it's probably really good for a whole range of skill levels, right?
Yeah. So the North Sea runs are a bit trickier for beginners unless you get like a side offshore day. And the reason being is the North Sea is super shallow, so even when you're like 3-4 kilometers out, it's only 10 to 16 meters. But then when you get to about a kilometer and a half out, it like will step down to 4 to 6 meters, like really quite abruptly, and then there's lots of sandbanks. So the problem there is if it's side shore or side on, you get really bad refraction at that depth change, and then it's quite messy and quite difficult for beginners. But if you go on a day where it's side offshore, the refraction's less bad, and especially if you go like within an hour of the wind turning on, then you can get really clean, really good bumps. And then it's like the lake. Those days don't happen that often, so I wouldn't say it's bad for beginners, but it's harder for beginners, especially with a paddle.
I want to get an idea of the ratio of like time on foil to how long it takes to do a whole run. So let's assume you're doing one with Sebrin. You meet at the endpoint.
Yeah.
So from that endpoint, start the clock, shuttle. You shuttle to the start. You do your run, and you get back to the car. Have you got a rough idea of how long that would normally take?
Yeah. So we're all about efficiency. So. For us to do this run, so let's say we do it typically wind southwest, so
yeah,
and then from the finish it's just under 40 minutes to get to the start. When we meet, it's probably less than 5 minutes turnaround time before we're driving again, just because we're used to
no faff.
There's no messing around, so it's just straight in, go. Then probably it's about 5 minutes to put the foils together at the top. Yeah. Because we've only already decided what foils we're going to use. and then from there it's another 5 minutes to the water.
Yeah.
Probably paddle out 10 minutes, because we do typically paddle out past to where there's slightly deeper water is, just to not get pinned in by the refraction for so long. You can normally start earlier and work your way out, but you don't want to waste half your run just chipping out.
Yeah.
So we'll do 10 to 15 minutes depending on how onshore the wind is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then the run, let's say typically it's between 35 and 45 minutes.
Okay.
And then once you're out, 5 minutes to the car, walk up the beach, and then you've got your
40-minute drive.
40 minutes back. Yeah.
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 Okay. So, just out of interest, what's the longest distance that you've done yourself on that coast?
Yeah, so we've done slightly more than 60 kilometers. So it's from the bottom of the coast, a place called Hoek van Holland. It literally translates to the corner of Holland, to the pier at IJmuiden, and that's about 60 odd kilometers. Did that with Sibren, and then two other guys, Joep and Kjell.
And
you could pull it through to the top of Holland and do 130 kilometers. The only reason we've not done it yet is safety. So to cross over, you've got to pass the Noordzee Canal. So it's the exit for the port of Amsterdam. So it's like one of the busiest shipping lanes in the country. It's on my to-do list, but I'm trying to figure out, like, is it best to do it with an escort boat or to just drive around? Because there's a kite downwinder called Hoek tot Helder, and that's the longest organized kite downwinder in the world. And they do that stretch, but they get out on one side of the pier, take a bus around, and then get in. And I don't want to set a precedent that if I do rogue foil across, then other people will go, oh, it's okay to do it, and that's the last thing you want, because those boats, they look like they move slow, but they actually move very fast. And they're very big.
Well, we have them come through Port Botany when we're doing a westerly run or an easterly run, and they don't mess around either. Like, if you're anywhere near in line of them, the pilot boats are out there, like, just hammering towards you and, like, trying to get you out of the way. So when you're doing like a 60k run, what are you doing for safety? Like, what is that something you're really conscious of? Like, and all your other guys as well. Like, what are the steps you're taking?
Yeah, so we use the same safety if we use 60k or if we do 10k. Like base safety. So we're always wearing the vests. I think I actually started wearing a vest after one of your posts about people should be wearing a vest and setting the right example for people coming into the sport. And
well, I appreciate that you're setting an example. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, it makes sense to wear one. So always we all wear PFDs.
Yeah.
We all carry phones. We always share live locations with each other. For the longer runs, there's a Coast Guard app made by Safe TRX, and that has a direct line to the Coast Guard. So if you're in trouble, you can open your phone, hit the button, and they know where you are. Additionally, me and Sibren, we both wear Safe TRX watches, which are watches with eSIMs and GPS. Well, you have two options. You can either do an alert, so then buddies that you assign get an alert. They can send you messages and you can answer yes or no using buttons on the watch. So I use that with my girlfriend. If I have issues, I can do alert and she goes, do I need to come pick you up? Yes, no, and she normally knows what run I'm doing. So, but in those situations, I normally call her. But the option's there. But the cool thing about the watch is there's also the direct link to the Coast Guard, so that you can just do an emergency alert without having to dick around with a wet touchscreen. And the other thing that we do for the bigger runs, or if we're crossing lakes, is we email the Coast Guard and tell them what we're doing, how many people are going. Or if we're doing runs where there's high visibility from the public, so some of the runs along the lakes go along the edge of the lakes. Yeah. And this is more for the beginners. We always ask them to tell the Coast Guard, but also give your phone number. Tell the Coast Guard that if someone does call in, to call you first, to avoid having someone coming out, because it's their duty of care. So even if you've emailed them or they know, if they can't get hold of you, they'll still come out. So we always ask the Coast Guard, please call us first. but that's more also for the beginners who are falling in along the side of a lake that everyone can see.
Yeah. It does seem that we talk about these measures in the context of wasted resources.
Yeah.
And that does happen a lot here. It's a coastline just with a lot of eyes on the water, but really the safety aspect needs to be just as, or more important, really. I know it's cool to hear you doing all those measures. On our longer runs, we have a marine rescue app that we can log a trip with, and I think it just pings location every 20 or 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So if we're doing something big, like the one I did my biggest Sydney run with Josh a few weeks ago from Maroubra to Palm Beach, which is the furthest north beach of Sydney.
Yeah, I saw that clip. That looks cool.
Yeah, and it was a big, like for me, that was an ambitious run, and really, like I was really happy to have Josh with me on that. Although we got split up off the start. We didn't connect till Manly, which is like halfway through the run.
We forgot one pretty big piece of safety stuff though. Wetsuits.
Yeah.
Wetsuits.
Yeah, okay.
Very important. Don't pay attention to what I do on Instagram because I'm barefoot in February, but warm wetsuits are important. Don't underestimate it. I think Ben, Dan, and Marcus had a bit of a shock. I think they were here in January after Boat, the trade show, and I took them downwinding, but I layered them up, 6mm suits, thick boots, even gloves. They had gloves on. I never wear gloves. I carry gloves just in case, but I don't wear them. But yeah, good.
So I guess that's a safety issue because if you're stuck in the water, then it becomes a real issue.
Water temperature even now is like 6 degrees still, but in winter it's 4 or 5 degrees. The lakes, the lakes are colder, 4 or 5 degrees. North Sea's always like 6, 7. But yeah, you just have to think about it from the perspective of like the best bumps on the North Sea are decently far off the coast. So if something were to happen, like on the best case, say you break a paddle or whatever and you paddle in, you're paddling an hour, 45 minutes, depending on what the current's doing. If you're in a rip, it's pushing out. And worst case, you're calling the Coast Guard because you've got an injury and you've got to wait. So you want to be warm. So we're always dressed pretty thick.
It's actually an interesting point that hasn't really come up before that I've seen. That wetsuits being an important safety item.
Yeah, I think if you're still in the North Sea in winter, you probably got about 30 minutes before you're hypothermic. So even having your PFD probably is it doesn't do much for you compared to what the cold could do to you. So in the winter as well, we're a bit more conservative on what we do and how far offshore we go. Like in the summer, we'll go 6-8 kilometers offshore sometimes. In the winter, we won't go more than 3.
Yeah. So also, John, what if people are going to come to Amsterdam, they find themselves there, they've got some equipment, maybe they've got half some equipment or bits and pieces, maybe they're, coming to downwind. What's the best way for them to come at that?
So it's not easy to get around public transport wise for these runs. So if you are coming to the Netherlands to downwind, having a vehicle does help. More just for getting to the start and to the finish, to the start or to the finish, depending on whatever works out best logistics wise. Most of us can help out with shuttles and all that. Yeah, if people want to come to the Netherlands and downwind, vehicle for getting to the runs is probably the most important thing, as next to the right wetsuit. And for the rest, I think there's enough frothers now that you probably can find a buddy, find a group somewhere to do a run. Actually, the other day in the group, someone from Belgium, Belgium's just next door, was like, I'm up here for work. How's the forecast looking? And anyone want to do a run? And I think 10 people replied, because it was a lake run, so it's more accessible, but 10 people replied, being we'd be keen to do a run. So that's really cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any concerns about someone that might visit, and is there anything they could do wrong, to kind of make things more difficult for your local crew, or is there anything that visitors should be respectful of?
No, I think The only thing that can really damage the image of the sport is if, as it grows, more people like get unnecessarily called out on for the Coast Guard, which is like the catch-22 of the lakes. The lakes are the most beginner friendly, but the lakes also have the highest probability of having the Coast Guard called on you. So I think, if people are visiting or getting into the sport here, like, just join up with the guys that are doing it, and just follow the safety protocols that we have with communicating with the Coast Guard. And then I think if we they don't mind, they actually really like it when we tell them what we're doing, and that we're available to be contacted. And then the other thing is, if they do call you, stop your run. Doesn't matter if you're on the way to an ace. Stop your run, answer the phone.
Cool. So John, what about times of year? Is there like a season that's better for downwinding in your area than others?
Yes, we got 2 times. So statistically, like, we have year-round wind, but like 80% of those days are like between 14 and 18 knots. But the most windy periods are spring and autumn. Spring is the one that sounds nicer, but actually the water's the coldest because it's cold from the winter. Autumn is actually better because the water's warm, and it tends to blow the hardest.
Yeah, it's definitely the same here too. The nicest time in Sydney is like March and April. Obviously the seasons are different, but sorry, go on.
Yeah, so for us, September, October, November are probably the best months. And I think that's most of Northwest Europe. So that's where you see like all the event clashes. Last year, I think the UK had the Kerno Foil Classic, which clashed with the French races, and then we also wanted to do an event. We actually didn't get wind, which was abnormal. So and then and that's typically southwest winds, and then in spring we get a lot more thermal effects as well because the sea's cold. So like yesterday, it was a north wind with a nice little thermal boost, and there is actually a period in May where you're like northeasters, which get like really good thermal effect. March, April, May is also a pretty good time to downwind here. And then summer, you'll get your thermal sort of sea breezes as well.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a bit trickier because it's light wind, and it's warm wind, so it's less dense. So the advantage of spring and autumn is the wind is a bit more dense and has a bit more punch. Yeah.
You've downwinded in quite a few places. I've seen you pop up all over the world. So what are a few places you have downwinded, and where would you rate, say, your typical local run on a decent day as far as difficulty? And we'll rate it 5 being most difficult, and 1 being easiest.
So wherever I downwinded a bit around Europe, so this is the Canary Islands, Tenerife and Fuerteventura. Barcelona didn't get the best conditions last year, but from what I've seen, it can get really good there. In Hawaii, of course, the races last year. I'd say the North Sea at its best is like a decently average Maliko kind of day, or like a light to medium Maliko day. So I'd give it it's like a 3 or 4. It's not like super hard, and it's nice easy bumps to read. It's not as fast as Maliko, but it reminded. I had one really good day when I came back from Maui, and I was like, this isn't that far off. And maybe like a 4 or 5 out of 10 Maliko, which for the Hawaiians is like nothing, but then when you go over there, you're like, oh, this is so good. So so the North Sea at its best can be good, but it does require going far offshore to the deeper water and having good wind.
So that's probably what bumps it up in difficulty a bit, in that you've got to be prepared to range out and chase. Yeah, you're
not straight into good bumps, unfortunately. There is actually one part of the coast where you can get straight into good bumps, but that needs a very specific wind direction. Which doesn't happen as often. It happens actually this time of the year. and it's only 15 kilometers, and it's in the very south of the country. So like, I can never be bothered to drive 2.5 hours for that run. But it's Yellowstope's local. He's one of the other main Dutch foilers. That's his local spot.
It's like they say in Africa, never leave water to find water.
Yeah, but it's a really cool run because it's like off the corner, so you're pretty much straight into deep water with really good fetch, so you can get like bombing bumps for 15 Ks. So.
Yeah, cool. Awesome, John. I'm stoked that we got to get together, and thanks for describing your local run. I don't know when I'm going to get there. My wife Kristen's actually, she might be going to Amsterdam later this year, but I'm not on that trip.
Yet.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm so stoked that we got to catch up like this, and I hope it's been really useful for people. So thanks so much.
This is a really cool concept. I'm really looking forward to seeing the other podcasts that you get out.
Hopefully we can get a few more.
Showcase what the runs are like around the world. Super cool.
Great. Well, thanks for telling us about yours.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, John.
Have a good one.
Peace.